Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Roney, the instructor for this course, and it's really unusual and a little disappointing that it's only here at the end of the course when you finally get a chance to meet me in person, and that I get a chance to talk with you in person. As you're probably aware from some of my bulletins and through other sources of information, we've gone through a very difficult semester uh, in which the full-time faculty have been asked to teach much larger than normal courses and more of them. Consequently, we've had to cut some corners and follow some practices that are not normal. The result, of course, is that I haven't been able to spend the kind of time with you that I really would have liked. I enjoy working with students, and aside from any regrets that you may have, I want you to know that I really regret not meeting you and getting to work with you personally a little bit more. One purpose of this video is to acquaint you with a change in how we're going to do the final exam for this course. If you look at the week number 7 on your Moodle shell, there has been an announcement that the final exam would be based on a review of the John Deere case. And I really had hoped to review the Deere case with you and to base the final exam on that review. Because the Deere case is just rich with all kinds of illustrations of strategic management principles and international management principles. I have used that case in my courses on international business this semester. And the final exam in those courses will be based on that case. But you and I haven't had a chance to go over the international business aspects of that case in this course. And since we haven't, it's not very reasonable for me to ask you to take a final exam on that particular case. So we won't. And that's a big change for what has been on your Moodle shell up until now. So what I want to do is acquaint you in this video with what will be on the final exam. And having done that, to fill in a blank, a topic that we should have covered by this point, but have not. And so in this lecture, or in this video, I'm going to give you a little lecture on international economic trends. And I think that that will round out the course on international business and give you a little insight into how things are shaping up around the world, although they continue to change. I just read an article about how, for instance, COVID is exploding in Southeast Asia, in India, in countries near India, such as Pakistan. And as a result, how the COVID pandemic may not be over. It may be reigniting in Southeast Asia. So the impacts of COVID on economies of this country, Europe, and others are pretty important, and I'll be touching on those impacts as I go through that video or through that lecture. So for right now, let me get started. And by the way, although this will probably be a long video, about the same as a normal class period, I expect, I'll go as quick as I can. And I'm sorry to take up so much of your time this late in the course, but the material in this video is really important, and it'll help to round out this course on international business for you. So with that, let me get started here. And the first thing I want to do is just acquaint you with what will be on the final exam. And now all I have to do is find that item. I think it's right here. Yeah, there we go. And I certainly hope you can see it. But these are topics that are going to be on the final exam. Let me sort of align this camera a bit. So there will be essentially 4 topics, some larger and more important than the others. The first is that material that I mentioned a minute ago, but what is it that's driving in the international business environment from an economic perspective? How have changes been occurring over the long term in the international business economy? Second, we've had 3 mini cases that I will be covering in the final exam. I hope you remember the Harley-Davidson case, which explored why a company needs to expand into international markets when its home market becomes saturated. Harley-Davidson dominated the US market, but it was being challenged by invaders from other countries, and it really needed to find new markets. Tata Motors, of course, was the producer, is the producer of relatively low-cost automobiles in India, but it's something like 75 or more % of its market is outside India. India's economy simply doesn't support large consumption of automobiles yet, but Tata has built an automotive organization that spans several countries, and it's been quite successful. Another auto company is Daimler Chrysler, only that was a different kind of a situation. I can see that I've got a little there we go. And Daimler Chrysler was a merger, as you may recall, that did not go very well. And that case explored how mergers of companies from different countries can make mistakes. However, one of the big mistakes Daimler and Chrysler made was to merge just before the U.S., a deep U.S. recession. And when that recession happened, consumption of cars really plummeted. Chrysler was punished severely, and as a result, the merger failed. And finally, Unilever, the company that is in the case is headquartered in Rotterdam, Holland, or the Netherlands, depending on whether you're European and prefer that term, or Holland, the way a lot of us refer to it. Holland is really a section of the Netherlands. It's the folks from the Netherlands are insistent on using that term, but again, lots of us in the United States haven't really learned the fine points. Anyway, Unilever is now headquartered in London, England. That's not mentioned in the case, but for your information, last year, after the book was published by a couple of years, Unilever decided to rationalize its organization and to merge the two companies that made up Unilever, one in Holland and one in the United Kingdom, and merge the two into a single corporation. And the parent company was set up in London, England. But in this case, we still refer to Unilever's headquarters as the Netherlands in Rotterdam, a very large port. That's the second group of information that the exam is based on. The third is a couple of topics that we've covered in this course. One is analytic models, and I'm sure you remember it because you had a quiz on it. And when I go through the first item on this list, international business conditions, I'll mention some economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. I'll post a PowerPoint slide file on Moodle so that you can refer back to it. And finally, for a very brief time, just a short, I think maybe 2 or 3 slides, I'm going to tell you about a survey of educational systems around the world that is done by OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's a very widely respected and recognized survey, which is done every 3 years, I believe. But the last one that was done and published was conducted in 2018. And that's because it takes at least a year to compile all the results from studying, in this case, I believe 60 countries, to compare the knowledge of high school juniors. So a year after that survey, those high school juniors will be seniors ready to go into college. And to the extent that a country's education system is ranked highly, then you can expect in the future that country's economic performance also to do well. On the other hand, if countries' educational systems don't do so well, then you can expect that their economies won't either, and that there will be impacts in their political and social systems as well as economic. So I'm going to run through a brief summary of those results so that you can see how the United States compares to other major countries in the world, and maybe we can draw some conclusions about what that means for the future of the US economy and other nations' economies. By the way, you will see me sipping coffee with cream in it. I've been making a lot of videos lately, and my throat is a little hoarse. And so by taking these drinks, I try to keep my throat moist enough to make these videos. So pardon me when I have to stop and do that. So this is what your final exam will be based on. With regard to the mini cases, you can start right now reviewing them, because there will be a question on each one, more than one question on each one of those cases, as there will be for analytic models. Um, the economic trends that we'll talk about in this video. Uh, and then just a few little questions about the results of the PISA survey that I'm going to show you. By the way, the exam will be entirely true, false, and multiple choice questions on these topics. No essay questions, nothing like that. Normally, this test takes about an hour for you to take. It really depends on how many questions there are. And when I post the test, which will probably be on Friday sometime, I will explain how many questions there are and so forth. So with that, let me get started on the economic trends review. Here I am again before I bring up the next set of slides. And I have to go look for them now. I hope that's the one. Let's find out. Yeah, got it. That's good for me because I sometimes have trouble with these things. So we're going to just take a look at some international economic trends, and then I'll put these PowerPoint slides in week 7 of your Moodle shell. Here we have some long-term trends of economies in several important countries or regions. The green line consists of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the 5 big countries there. Not stellar, not real strong performance. I do want you to know that there's some significant growth going on in that region. Let's see. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. The blue line is the United States, and it sort of is keeping up with the European Union. They usually go in lockstep. And then we have the red line, China. And as you can see, China's economic growth has been much faster than other major countries in the world. In 2013, it caught up with the United States and surpassed it. And in 2014, it caught up with Europe and surpassed it in size. And so here we are in 2021. So I need to move this little line over a little more. And when I do, you can see that I've got to stretch it up a little bit because the gap between China and other countries has widened. Now these numbers and projections were prepared by the the International Monetary Fund, gosh, IMF. That organization is not biased. It doesn't have a favorite in the US or any other. It just tries to tell the truth. Now, these numbers are going to change due to the pandemic. And what we're finding out is that China for whatever reason, and again, you know, we don't want to get wound up in politics or philosophy. Frankly, I believe that the pandemic began in Wuhan, China, a city that I have visited, and before the pandemic. But I think the evidence is pretty clear there. China was successful in recovering from the pandemic faster than other countries. And maybe that's because they understood what they were dealing with sooner. So we could get into that, but the bottom line is that the United States and Europe have not recovered while China did recover. And so the gap between China and Western nations is widening further. The implications of a chart like this is that if you're doing business internationally and you don't participate in the Chinese market, you're missing out on a major source of growth and opportunity. Unfortunately, there's real trade tension between the US, Europe, and China. And consequently, some trade barriers have gone up. And though that will change over time for better or worse. But again, the bottom line is that a real target for opportunity is China. Here are some emerging countries. And one of the important trends we can see here is the accelerating growth of India. And and here is, just for reference, see where we had ASEAN down below. It was the green line, but when we come down here, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is one of the stronger trends. But stronger still is India. Now, India is not at a large economy yet, but it's a large country. It has almost as many people as China does, about 1.4 billion people, compared to the US 330 million, I think. So it's got more than a billion more people than the US does. So eventually, India is going to be an important consumer market. And we often like to say in my courses that China is the growth market of the present. India is the growth market of the future. Incidentally, you can see that that Japan has had a sort of a slowdown. You know, there's been a change of pace in the Japanese economy. And the blue line is represents a group of countries that interest me a great deal because of their potential, but that potential remains to be realized. But these are the less developed countries in Europe, the emerging and developing European countries in Eastern Europe. Again, I have visited some of those countries, and I've been impressed by the possibilities that exist there. Again, they remain to be realized. The gross national saving rate is the sum of corporate profits, which are really saving, aren't they? If you know, it's the difference between revenue and costs and taxes, and what's left over is net income, and it's saved by the company until it's reinvested. So in a sense, corporate profits and saving are sort of the same thing. And if you add them together, you get what's called the gross national saving rate. And if we express it as a proportion of gross domestic profit, gross domestic product, we can get an estimate of the country's tendency and probability of investing in its infrastructure to take that cash and invest it in fixed assets, be it property and equipment, machinery, construction of buildings and so forth. But to grow the physical structure of the country rather than consume. And so here we see some trends in gross national saving rate of major countries. And we see that the top red line is that group that we had mentioned earlier, the 5 largest countries in the Association of Southeast Asia. Let's see if I can remember them. It's, I often can, but I'm an old man and sometimes things don't work up there the way they used to. But we would have Thailand, Singapore, let's see, Vietnam. Oh my, there I go. And I can't remember the other two. And Indonesia and Malaysia. So those countries have a lot of growth potential, and they have relatively high gross national saving rates. You can see that sub-Saharan Africa, on the other hand, the countries in that group don't offer a lot of prospects for growth of their infrastructures. And in the middle, we see the world average, and lower than average is the Euro area, the group of 28 countries that use the Euro as the currency. And that's a good sample for the, let's see, do I have that? The 17 countries, and 17 of the 28 countries in Europe, in the European Union. These are 17 that use the common currency. And they represent a good sample of Europe. And you can see that the reinvestment in those infrastructures isn't quite as strong as the world average, so they are below average. Now, here is Western Europe in a little more detail. So this is sort of a reflection or a breakdown of additional European countries other than that average that we just saw. And no surprise, we see that Germany is much stronger in its gross national saving rate and has a much higher probability of growing its infrastructure. Italy, on the other hand, is the lowest on this chart. And again, having visited Italy, I can confirm that's kind of reflective of what I thought I saw. Frankly, I think Spain came out better in this survey than I thought it would, but it's below the world average. Now, here's the punchline. If we were to go back over the other rates, let's see what's highest here. The highest for the ASEAN group was about 31%. Germany, the highest of the big European countries, about 28%. Here's China. Its highest has been over 50%. You can't keep growing at 50% a year. But even when I move this line over to where it ought to be, you can see that it's still somewhere around 42%. And again, these are the IMF estimates and projections. And the IMF does pretty accurate work. So this is essentially the way things are. But what it means is that China has a great deal more capability to invest in itself, in its roadways, highways, infrastructure, buildings, its mechanical and industries and so forth. The sound that you heard, if you just heard it like I did, was my dog barking outside the window. Anyway, and China sort of sets itself apart from other major countries of the world by a pretty long shot. You can see that the U.S. Gross national saving rate was, until the pandemic, about 20%. And when these numbers are recalculated, I'm sure we'll see the U.S. drop because the U.S. has been so involved in these programs to recover from the pandemic. It's not, but it's not, those programs don't involve gross national savings, that is corporate profits and personal saving, but lots of borrowed money, which will have a favorable effect for a while, but there are also unfavorable effects. And we may be able to talk about a couple of those later on. You can see in the middle we have India and Russia. And again, when we compare those numbers to what we saw earlier about average for the pack. But the standout here clearly is China. Okay, so now we're going to talk about very briefly some trade balances. That is the difference between imports and exports. And here we can take just a real quick look. You can see China in the top on the left. These are the aggregate balances in billions of dollars. You want to be a little careful with these billions of dollars because billions of dollars, even when they're represent a currency conversion from Chinese yuan, but Chinese yuan buy a lot more goods and services than the equivalent number of US dollars. That's an issue that I hope we'll be able to talk about in this meeting. Otherwise, I wish we could. When we do currency conversions using purchasing power rather than bank exchange rates, we get very different answers. Anyway, on the right side, you can see the China trade balance as a proportion of GDP, and with a projection by the IMF. And again, those projections will change because of the pandemic. Nevertheless, as a general rule, we can say that China's trade balances have been favorable. That is to say, they sold more than they bought. Their exports exceeded imports, but you can also see that in recent years that balance has changed. And the reason for the change has been the complaint of Western nations that China has been exploiting its trade relations and not trading equally and enough. The lower two charts reflect India, and you can see that that's a much different proposition. You can see that these numbers go into the negative, sometimes by some very substantial amounts. For instance, here we have a deficit of about $80 billion. And the IMF projection was not very favorable at all. I hope when these projections are revised, there will be some change in India's policies that warrant a shift back up. But this is not favorable, among other things, for India's currency. India buys imports much more than it exports, and consequently, it has to come up with a whole lot of foreign currencies, particularly for energy. Then here we see these deficits as proportions of the GDP. There was one year, 2016, it looks like, when things were getting positive, but that did not last. And we're down now to about 3% of GDP deficit. But that's a pretty substantial amount. Russia is a supplier of oil to Europe, and consequently, it has had, over the years, a positive trade balance, both in rubles or dollars and as a percent of the GDP. That's favorable for Russia. Europe has also had a favorable trade balance, but you got to be a little careful in the way you look at European numbers, because there are so many European countries in close proximity that they trade back and forth across each other's borders, kind of like the trade between states in the United States. And so the numbers are very high in Europe, but that's because of the geography of Europe as much of anything. Here's the United States, and again, it's kind of a punchline. You can see that all these numbers are negative, and sometimes quite heavily negative. In 2005, it looks like the deficit was $800 billion. Now, again, when we recompute these numbers for the pandemic, we're probably going to see a deeper dive than we do already, although it looks like I'm trying to get some fix in here, but I guess I can't. You can see that there's a dip in 2020 and 2021. So we may have already made the adjustment there. And as a percent of GDP, it just, it has been really deep, almost 6%, which is not good. Currently we're somewhere around a 2.5 or 3%. This again throws question into the valuation of U.S. currency. I don't have time to explain the reasons for that. I really wish I did, but it has to do with the supply and demand for currency, as well as inflation in the nations where this currency, where the currency understudy is located. And these forces can really change the value of currencies. If a nation is exporting a lot, then other nations will have a demand for its currency. And it could be that that currency will therefore rise in value because the demand for the currency relative to the currencies of its customers will rise. On the other hand, if inflation is really high, then the future demand of the future value of that currency is going to decline, and that'll have an offsetting effect. So those are the kinds of forces that can come into play. Let's take a look at some population trends now. Here we're looking at the European Union on the top line and the United States on the bottom. And you can see that the European Union, as more countries come into the Union, grows in terms of population. The US has had a steady growth. I'm sorry, yeah, the US has had steady growth in population. This line will be changed, and it'll come down a little at the extreme. Last year, we had a big surprise, and growth of the US population was only about, and please don't hold me to this, but I think it was something like 0.2%, and the year prior, 0.5%, something on the order. So what we see is a slowing down of population, and we may see some additional numbers reflecting this trend. But the US, quite simply, is a mature nation, and its population, of course, is much larger than the largest country in the European Union, but there are 28 countries there, and so the European Union is larger in terms of population than the US. So when it's the European Union policies, economic policies affect demand for a product or restrict a product or put regulations on a product, that affects a very large consumer population of over 500 million. And the US population about today, about 330 million. So you get the idea, you know, it's about 2/3 larger than the US population. Now, on the right side, the red lines tell a fascinating story. Let me get a little drink of coffee here. Do you notice something about the top line, which is Russia? It is starting downward. And in fact, last year, Russia's population inched downward. It didn't grow, it declined. For that reason, Russia's government is actually encouraging people to have more and larger families. But there seems to be an economic explanation for this. Things are kind of tough in Russia, not least of which reasons being that the US and Europe have put some very severe sanctions on Russia because of its acquisition of the Crimea, which is about 85 or 90% Russian population. The Europe and the US may not like it, but the people in the Crimea do. Russia's expansionary and threatening behaviors toward Ukraine. And that's a different situation because the Ukrainians would rather stay Ukrainian. And the Ukrainian leaders have made suggestions about joining the European Union, which would have a major impact on the European Union, as well as Russia. Russia does not want that to happen, and has demonstrated threats against the Ukraine, largely because of the possibility that Ukraine would move in the direction of Europe and the West and away from the influence of Russia. Ukraine was part of the old Soviet Union, and the Russians don't like that at all. So it's becoming a less happy place to live. Again, I've visited Russia and several parts of it. It's actually a beautiful country, and the people are pretty down to earth. You know, they've got a different philosophy, but of how society should function. But this is strictly a conflict between governments. And as a result, the sanctions by the US and Europe against Russia have been severe and limited its growth. Look at the bottom line. Japan's population has been declining for several years, and that trend does not seem likely to change. Birth rates are low in China. The life expectancy and longevity in Japan is increasing, and as a result, there's simply less family formation, and this presents some real economic challenges to Japan. But you know, I would think that if you're in the business of selling residential houses, you know, homes, that's probably not a good market. Here we see probably one of the most important topics of international demographics, and that is the population trends of China and India. I don't know if you can tell it on this chart, but the population of China has begun to decelerate. And it's pretty obvious now that within the next very few years, we will see the Chinese population decline. And that's because the birth rate will decline. And again, you know, China's economy has been successful. People are living longer, but they're having fewer families. On the other hand, India is in a completely different place. And so their birth rate is higher than mature economies, mature countries, and continues to grow, while Russia's population flattens and then declines. So by 2022, perhaps 2023, we'll see India's population surpass the population of China. And just by looking at this chart, you can understand why I often tell my students that China is the growth economy of the present. India is the growth market of the future. There are a lot of consumers there. Here we see the way we chart and understand demographic groups. And in this case, it's from just before World War II to 2010. And you can see that the age groups differed quite dramatically. After the war, people got married in the US, and pretty soon we saw an increase in population from birth rates and so forth. You can see the 25 to 44-year-old group grew very rapidly. Be careful as you look at these lines, how many years between 25 and 44? 20. How many years between 5 and 15? Only 10. So 45 to 64, another 20 years. So we can compare 45 to 64, which was the fastest growing group, and 25 to 44. But we just need to be careful. By the way, down here in this blue line, we see seniors over 65, the ones that followed this black line. Now, if we move to 2010 and beyond, we get a much different picture. Here are those 25 to 44s again, and they've no longer slowed down. They've started growing again. It's a big group, 20 years. Here's the 45 to 64 group, and they've kind of, they're sort of flattened out and maybe declined a bit. But here's that group that was just poking along, these seniors, where'd they go? See, they were growing and they had started to take off. And now here we can see between 2020 and 2030, they are the explosive population group. And later on, we'll see the group over 65 be an explosive population group. Longevity in the United States is increasing. But if you're selling consumer products in the United States and you're targeting the seniors market, you're in pretty good shape. But if you're targeting the empty nesters, the folks 45 to 64, it's a large group. So you still have lots of marketing potential, but it's not a growing group. It's one where you want to get customers to associate with your product and your brand and become loyal to it. On the other hand, we see these young adults growing steadily, and a large number of them. This is a good market for homes and cars, the kind of things that people need when they are active adults. Okay, so this is the sort of thing that we look at when we judge demographics. Here is a group of countries and the proportions of their populations that are over 65. And as I explained earlier, this top line is Japan. And you can see that in 2020, over a quarter of Japan's population were seniors. This has some real ramifications economically. Among others, when these people are not working, they're not contributing taxes to sustain the government. Instead, they're expecting the government to contribute to them. And when there are so many of them, that becomes a real chore for the government, and the government doesn't have enough left over to conduct all the functions of a government, and that creates a big problem. Here we have the European Union, and or the Eurozone, I guess it indicates only 15 countries. But you can see that that line is also increasing. So seniors are beginning to pick up the majority of the European population. They're up to 20% now. And a big increase is occurring in Korea. It's not up to the troublesome place that Japan and Europe are, but it's on the way. Incidentally, the dotted line is the United States. We're up to about 15%, and that proportion is rising, and already it's beginning to cause some problems. Mexico has a much lower life expectancy because conditions aren't as favorable there, and it doesn't have the kind of problem that the folks in Japan have. This again is something that I don't want to spend too much time on, but it's been in a topic of discussion off and on for the past decade or so. You can see that, among other things, these are old data, but that just means that the trends that were underway have gone further than when these exhibits were prepared. But what you can see is that the proportion of people in the United States that never have been married is growing at about doubled between 1960 and 2010. And so here in 2021, I'll have to get these data updated, but I'm pretty sure we'll see a larger portion still. The portion that are married dropped from 72%, about 3/4, to half. So something's going on here in the US, and it's going to have a great deal of impact on consumer buying behaviors. And incidentally, this same pattern is occurring in other countries. I don't know whether I have those data for you, but I hope I do. The age at which people get married is increasing. When these data were put together a decade ago, the average age for men when they got married was almost 30 years old, and for women about 26 or 27. So again, big changes in demographic and social patterns. And here the differences are by age group. The younger folks who were married when they were 18 to 24 had been 45 in 1960. That fell to 9%. In the 25 to 34-year-old group, it used to be 82%. It dropped in half. At 35 to 44, the 82 became 86. The 44 became 62. That's when people were getting married, and so forth. And then the proportions who had not been married by age group, and this was whether they had ever been married. And you can see that the proportions grow up, but they go up more slowly in the more recent years. And by the way, this chart down here and this chart are identical because I made a mistake in putting it together. There are significant differences, not just in age groups, in terms of marriage behavior, but the attitudes about marriage. So the survey that was done by the Pew Research Group, a very well-respected organization, asked whether people thought marriage was becoming obsolete. The average answer was yes, 39% of the time. But it differed. It was highest among younger folks, lowest among older folks, as you might expect. And there were differences ethnically and by whether when folks had or did not have a college education. So big things going on there. Here's something that I'm actually going to discuss with you at the end of this review, but it's okay to mention it now briefly. Let me get a little drink of water here. The Program for International Student Assessment is conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a very well-respected group of some 37 countries that actually surveys 60 countries every 3 years. Now, this happens to be a set of results from 2015. Later on, I'll show you the results for 2018, which are even more severe. But here is the results for math scores, and you can see that we've got Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan. Those are all Chinese, right? China, the mainland, is here, along with Japan and Korea. So we've got the Asian countries up here. Then we come way down here and we find the United States. The top score, by the way, that is obtainable is 600 points. So in this particular case, the best score was 560. The average score for the US was almost 200 points below that. The average for OECD was about 500. So clearly, these, by the way, are high school students, juniors, who are getting ready to become seniors and look for college. And so they indicate the quality of skills that will be moving into colleges. And you can see that the math skills up here in the Asian countries are a lot higher. And frankly, the difference was still dramatic in the 2018 survey, which I will show you. Here is the performance in reading. Again, the best score is 600. The highest scores tended to be Asian again, Singapore, Hong Kong. Look at Canada, number 3. Really impressive. Korea, Japan, couple others, Estonia, Finland. Today in 2018, all the top scores were Asian and in particular China. Down here we have the US, a little bit under 500, above average, but not by much. So again, a pretty significant difference in difference between US high school students' reading abilities and other major countries in the world. If we go to science, again, we see the same leaders up here, with lots of them from Asia, including China and Chinese provinces such as Macau. Then down here, the US under 500 compared to the best score of 556, so about a 10% difference. What does this tell you? What does this tell you? Now, again, we're going to see the real results from the most recent survey, so I don't want to linger here too long. But what it is saying is that the U.S. economy obviously is a product of the ability of people in the United States to perform economically, to grow the value of assets and resources, to increase the value of businesses, to solve economic problems. And it looks from these results like the US is slipping into a position of disadvantage. And if that is true, then the implications for the economic competition between the US and countries such as China are not very comforting. So we'll take a look now at birth rates. And we can see what I was telling you earlier, and I'll try to get my little window out of the way for you so you can see the US. But worldwide, birth rates are declining. This is because, well, it's for a number of reasons, and we don't want to get into those too much, but it includes the availability of birth control. It also includes the education of women. As women become more educated, they become aware that they can control their bodies. And as they become employed, they decide that having large families isn't what they want. You can see, though, remember that Russia's population was declining, and so we see that Russia is trying to encourage higher birth rates. In the very underdeveloped countries, we can see declines, but the declines are down to levels that still are above replacement ages or replacement rates, whereas in mature countries like the US, the birth rates are below the replacement rate. So Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, boy, look at that one drop. And especially Nigeria, Brazil, Latin America, they're all declining, aren't they? So this is going to have a big impact on market potentials, consumer market potentials. So folks in the consumer market, consumer marketing industries are well aware of these trends, and they're adjusting their marketing priorities accordingly. The population is growing older. Okay, and here's the same information in terms of life expectancy, and we get some real interesting results here. Over in the upper right-hand corner, you see a slight decline in US life expectancy. It's probably the only country where we see it. And the question is, why is life expectancy declining just slightly, but declining in the US? The answer happens to be that we don't take very good care of ourselves. Among other things, our nation is highly obese, and we have a high rate of, the illness that comes with obesity. I've got a mental block, but I think there's a slide in a shortly that'll remind me what that word is, but I should remember it, and I don't. Anyway, you can see that the life expectancies differ around the world a great deal. Nigeria is one of the countries that is underdeveloped, and you know, it's a lot harder for folks to be healthy in Nigeria, and you can see that there is about a 25-year difference in life expectancies of the US versus Nigeria. That's a long time, isn't it? Russia, a little bit less than the US, but rising. China, also rising a little bit, almost the same as the US, a couple of years less, more than the world average at 76 years old. India, not as highly developed, less less health maintenance, less opportunities to be healthy in India. And so there's a pretty significant difference there. Again, if the world average is 72 and the US average is 78, there's India 10 years younger than the US. That's a pretty large difference, isn't it? Brazil's doing pretty well at 76 years, but the world leader in life expectancy is Japan at 84 years old. Again, if we compare Japan's 84 to the US 78, that's a 6-year difference. Japan, as we saw earlier, has a very high proportion of senior citizens. So here's the problem that we mentioned earlier, and that is the U.S. Life expectancy. And this happens to be a chart showing global trends in overweight and obesity. And as you can see, whether we're talking about obese or we're talking about overweight, the trends are upward. And in the case of overweight, substantially so. And again, we can contrast countries' rates of obesity. And when we do, we find that the US is more obese than any other major country. And quite remarkably, the second most obese is our southern neighbor, Mexico, and this has to do with dietary habits and economic issues. But in the case of the U.S., you know, as of 2010, the obesity rate was what, 36%. By this time, I think we can probably guess that it's higher. Here's a different set of trends in the global, in this case, the global auto industry, and the portions of auto production that occur in various regions of the world. And one of the things you'll notice is that Europe and North America, the blue and the red bars, are working their way down as percentages of the total, whereas Southeast Asia is working its way up. And that's a very interesting chart. And frankly, we know that the reason is production in China. I think we'll probably see a chart. Yeah, here's one. This is just cars, but look at the difference in Chinese auto production versus auto production in other countries, including the US. The US is the blue line, the red line going upward, and this is through 2016. Right after that, the Chinese auto production rate, as well as European and US auto production rates, began to decline. But there still is a very large difference between Chinese auto production and auto production elsewhere. One reason is that there are about 10 auto manufacturers in China that are just Chinese. The largest producers of cars in China include Volkswagen and Volkswagen and I cannot remember the name. So the but again, we can see the large difference between China and other countries. There was a large thunderbolt that hit my house, and that's why I got interrupted. We seem to be having a thunderstorm here. Let's see, Volkswagen and I can't remember the other one. Shame on me. So here's a trend in Chinese auto production. And you can see that Chinese auto production has gone up quite remarkably and then began just in 2018 to tail off a little bit. The global auto production with China is the dotted line down here, and the blue line would be auto production without Chinese production. And I might add that this chart was produced in China. In any event, during the 11 years from 2007 to 18, global auto production grew at a very slow rate, less than 0.5% a year. With China included, it grew by 2.5% a year. So auto production in China all by itself tripled. And that explains these differences we've talked about. Here's this. These data are out of date, and I'm sorry for that. I really need to update these. But you can see there's the other one, Toyota. So back in 2017, Toyota had an 11% market share, up from about 10. Volkswagen had an 11% share, up from about 9. And when we see later data, we see that Volkswagen moved into the top spot. A big surprise was General Motors, which dropped from 14% to 7% market share, a big decline. So there's a lot of dynamism, a lot of movement in the auto industry of China. In terms of countries, where do we see the largest amount of auto production? And the data are a little more recent here, 2018, just before the big decline occurred. And we see that China accounted for almost 30% of global auto production in 2018, and that was about 10% its share in 2000. So China has just exploded in the auto industry. The US dropped from 22% to 12%. Japan dropped from 17 to 10, and so forth. But here they all are. One surprise is India. that increased its position from 15% to 4%. That is, I'm sorry, from rank 15 to rank 4, from 1.5% to 5.5% global market share. So something's going on in India, and in my other classes, I actually look at this quite a bit with my students. So, but you have to be careful when you look at data like this. This is one of the best-selling cars in India. It's called a three-wheeler, and because the income and GDP per capita of people in India is a lot smaller than it is in the US and Europe, cars like this are very popular in India. You wouldn't buy one, but believe me, Bajaj, I hope I said that right, Bajaj Auto sells a whole lot of these. So does Suzuki, and Suzuki is the largest producer of cars in India, the Japanese company. Okay, now, just before I say goodbye, I want to show you a couple other little bits of information. First, I mentioned the PISA scores, and we saw briefly the scores from 2015. Here are the most recent scores from data collected in 2018, and we can see that the ranks of these countries have changed quite a bit. So we'll start with reading and reading comprehension. China now holds first place, and if we look down at the footnote, Macau, a Chinese province, is number 3, and Hong Kong number 4, which is now absorbed into China. So China held the first, third, and fourth positions. Singapore, which was number 1 in 2015, is now number 2, but it has similarities to China. So it's quite remarkable that out of 600 points, Chinese high school students scored 556. And then if we take a look at other countries, notice, by the way, these ranks don't go 1, 2, 3, 4. I've just picked off interesting countries and identified what their rank is, but Canada does pretty well at 520. The US is ranked 13th compared to Canada's 6th, with a score of 505. So its score is about 50 points below China's, or 10%. That's enough to make a difference economically. If we take a look at math scores, we see again that China's score is very high, with Macau, Hong Kong, and Taipei accounting for all but rank number 2. So China number 1, Singapore number 2, and then these Chinese provinces, the remaining 3 of 5 positions. And China's score averaged 591 out of 600. That's pretty good, isn't it? Now, if we work our way down, we see that Canada again does well with a score of 512. Russia in 30th position at 488, not nearly as good. But down here, the US at 37th position in math with a score of 478. It's more than 100 points. It's about 113 points below China. And that's a very large proportion, isn't it? So in math, The U.S. is going to have difficulty producing engineers of the same quality that are being produced in China and its provinces. And you know, that's happening right now. These are scores from 2018. So those people are in college today. And these people from China are learning more, and they're building more engineering skills and other mathematical skills than students in in U.S. universities on average. When we get to science, things aren't quite as bad. China scores 591, again, out of a maximum 600. There's Singapore #2, and Macau is #3, and Hong Kong is #4. And then Canada, again, does quite well, 518, and has a rank of #8 in the world. The US has a rank of 18. Not as bad as 37, but not as good as 8 either. And the US has a score of 500, just about 20% below the Chinese score. And that's enough to make a big difference also in technology industries, which you and I know are what is making big differences economically today. So when we see these scores, we have to come away asking questions about what it is about American education that is putting us in this position. That's not a subject for this course, but I encourage you to ask and find out because America's economic future, as well as potentially its diplomatic, even its military future, will depend on the answer. But there are big differences here. I think one of the big surprises to me is how well the Canadians do. I've done a lot of business in Canada, and I can tell you that these differences really ring true to me. When I have worked with companies in Canada, I found that very often I could get more done with them than I could with companies in the United States. Their people are simply able to understand instructions, to read and comprehend, and sometimes to do math faster than in the US. So companies can move faster. Some Canadian companies really can move faster than American companies can. So you can just imagine how much faster Chinese companies can go. And the proof is in the pudding. Remember the charts that we saw of the growth rate of Chinese economy versus others. So on the other hand, poor Mexico. It doesn't look to me like Mexico is getting ready for any kind of a breakout into the high-tech world. Far from it. So in the case of Mexico, I think we just need to look on that country as a source of labor and raw materials. And as their population grows, perhaps consumer markets. But in terms of technology and the like, sadly, Mexico's education system simply is not preparing that economy for growth and the quality of economies up here at the top. So this is really sobering information. I wanted to show it to you because it's going to make a difference in the world you live in. Okay, I think we have one more little item, and that's COVID. And this won't go too long, and I warned you at the beginning this would be a long video. Um, so these slides simply show us a few trends that reflect the impact of the coronavirus on economic trends. And these are results in the first half of 2020 when the coronavirus hit. And you can see that the OECD countries dropped 15%, that the world dropped about 12 or 13%. The US economy dropped about 14%. But then after the first half ended and we moved into the second half, a funny thing happened. And again, this is where I will not get into philosophy or political points of view, but quite clearly, China's economy recovered and began to grow, while other large economies, such as Russia's, Brazil's, the United States, and Japan, continued in recession. As a matter of fact, as you can see, Japan's economy actually got worse. And today, as we speak, China is struggling again with the pandemic. And the US is still in this chart in the second half of 2020 in recession. The good news is that here in 2021, the US is pulling out. Looks like we're going to hit recovery, perhaps, and by recovery, I mean reaching pre-pandemic levels, perhaps in the first quarter of 2021, if not certainly the second quarter. Here we see trends in shipping, both air cargo and ocean cargo. And you can see that in 2020, when the pandemic hit, down they went. Shipping of both ocean and air cargo really dropped sharply. These are big, big, big drops from, in the case of air cargo, over 90%. I won't linger on this chart, but this simply shows what the trend of the world merchandise trade would have been before the pandemic, and then when I'm sorry, first before the financial meltdown in 2009, and then using the same technique, what the trend would have been if the pandemic had not occurred. And the purpose is simply to show the substantial impact that recessions can have on global growth. Pretty significant. And this is the outlook for merchandise trade. And the blue line is an optimistic forecast. The orange line is a pessimistic forecast. And the gray line is the best estimate of the World Trade Organization. Frankly, I think we're going to track on the, and this of course is for the world, but it looks like we're moving more toward the blue line than the gray line. I say more toward because in some countries, particularly India, the pandemic is still raging wildly, and that's not, and the same is true in Africa. So now those regions don't impact the world's economies like major, more developed economies do. So I'm inclined to think that we'll be on the positive trend here. But the problem is the underdeveloped nations. They're not handling the pandemic very well. Here we see what happened to world merchandise exports and imports. You can see the top line The gray line is Asia. Yes, it dropped, but it didn't drop as much as North America did, which dropped quite a bit, and particularly exports. You can see that the blue line here is North American exports, and it came down almost to the same level as Europe. But Europe has really, really suffered in the pandemic, and it still is suffering. Its economy is still in recession for sure. Here, a few little indicators of rates of decline in exports and imports in the year of 2020 for the U.S., for North America rather. And if we just come down to the bottom, we see that the real GDP growth rate for the world was a drop of about 5%. North America, 4.5%. South America, 7.5%, and Europe about the same. So Europe, as we know, mentioned earlier, has really seen some hard times in the pandemic. This is a picture showing the balance of payments in the US when the pandemic occurred, and you can see that there was a real decline all the way down to about $180 billion. These are trends in international commercial flights. The green line shows trade travel within the European Union, between countries in the European Union, and they improved, they got better. Here, the blue and the red lines reflect international travel, international air travel. And you can see that they dropped sharply and really are far from recovering. These are another comment on world trade, but the chart underscores differences that have occurred in industries. Some industries haven't been impacted as severely as others. As you can see, agricultural products are needed daily. And so the decline in that industry in the first quarter of 2020, no decline. In the second quarter, yes, a little bit, 5%, but nothing like the decline in fuels, gasoline, concrete, and coal, and so forth, or the 19% decline in consumption of manufacturing products. And overall, the world's decline was 21%. I'm sorry, the US decline was 21%, but it was only 5% in agriculture. So some industries were able to withstand the coronavirus pandemic. I'll let you look at this chart at your leisure, but it points out again that some industries did better than others. So over here we see pharmaceuticals growing. No surprise there with the vaccines and so forth. Integrated circuits and those products that we use more and more, especially when we're locked up and can't go to the office and have to communicate in our business or school electronically, and the same for computers, and rather interestingly, textiles. Then we see where the real damage has been, and automotive products, big declines through June of last year. So this is the the impact of the pandemic as it occurred through the second quarter. And we can see the impact on various product categories. Today, things are a little bit better. Here, by the way, is the last slide, you'll be glad to know, and it's the trend in aircraft shipments. And so our friends at Boeing are not very happy. Their shipments had gone up. Remember the Boeing 737 MAX had just been released for shipment, and boom, that well-known commodity hit the fan. And so the U.S. Aircraft industry has suffered tremendously. And the UK aircraft industry, I don't know whether you can see it, but it's a yellow line here, and that would be Airbus. Airbus has held on better than Boeing. Boeing has really suffered tremendously in the pandemic. Okay, I think we're done. Let me get us out of here if I can. Zoom is sometimes not very friendly with operators. I can solve this problem if I have to, and I guess I'll have to. See what happens. Okay, now, will you let me out? No? Oh, I sure don't want that. So normally there's a little window that comes up that enables you to stop sharing, but this time it didn't happen. Please give me just a second. I want to check something. Yeah, that's it. So here then, just as a reminder, is what you need to prepare for, and that's this test. And I'll have this test ready to put on Moodle Shell, I think on Friday night. And it won't take you too long to take it, but I'll give you 3 days just so that you'll have plenty of time to study the quizzes for these cases and for analytic models, and go over the PowerPoint slides that I will post to Moodle at the same time I post the test. So again, see if I can stop sharing. Thank you very much for being with me in this course, and for withstanding this rather long lecture. I'm sorry about that, but I hope you got some useful information from it. So with that, I'll let you go. Goodbye.